Welcome to Science of Slink, the evidence-based poll podcast, an episode. Very, very excited for those of you all who have taken classes with me. I've probably talked to you about this already, but sometimes I'll mention like circadian rhythm stuff and my friend who studies circadian rhythm. And this is that friend. It's Olivia Walch, CEO of Arcascope, and particularly relevant, author of Sleep Grove, her book that just came out, which is all about sleeping and circadian rhythm and light exposure and all that good stuff. And very excited Olivia can come on the podcast and talk to us because I know, listen, we're all nerds here. We're all into science and bodies and shit, and that's the topic du jour. So, Olivia, do you want to give like a little brief introduction to yourself and then just top level highlights? I think people have probably heard a little bit. Listen, I've told you all to sleep. You know, you got to rest and recover, especially if you're training.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Rosie, we met in college. And
Yes.
during my college days, I was like a sleep gremlin. I just wasn't doing it. I was like, I need to experience everything. But most of it was like not the fun stuff of college. It was like, I need to do this problem set and serve on judicial council, like all this stuff that I was just trying to pack into my schedule. And I did a lot of stuff, but I don't really remember it because I just wasn't sleeping. And like sleep plays this important role in memory. And so I got to grad school. I was like, I gotta sleep more. And I did. I slept a lot more, but I didn't actually feel, wow, this is so much better until I was a participant in a research study. I got like paid $35 for it. And what I had to do is keep the same bedtime every single night for basically 4 months. And that is the point in my life when I switched from, yeah, I'm fine, to like, oh, I actually feel really, really good when I'm doing this. And kind of devoted my career as a researcher. I did my PhD at Michigan, my University of, and like later postdoc, and then I founded a company all about understanding why I felt so good when I was going to bed at the exact same time every night. I was wearing a watch where the researchers could spy on me and see if I didn't listen. So I was like, oh, I have to. And then I felt so much better that I was like, well, okay, I'm going to keep doing this now for the rest of my life. And the answer is circadian rhythms. Like the answer is sleep regularity or being in a sleep groove is really your circadian clock making itself known in disguise. A downside to that statement is people have heard the word circadian rhythm, but if you're like, define it, like most people are like, sleep. And so there's this like UI or like UX problem with it. Like people don't have good ways of talking about circadian rhythms. And so when I was like, hey, let me get the word out about this, my number one goal was to try and build up an intuition for what a circadian rhythm even is.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that I think about a lot is how little of human time, if we think about all the stuff that led up to like us being Homo sapiens, how little of the time that we have been around as a species have we had things like screens and electric lights. Like even, we're coming up on what, 100 years of mass electrification, at least in the United States, which is like 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 generations. And it's been a huge change in humaning.
100%. Yeah, this is one of my favorite things. So people sometimes say like, oh, modern life is really hurting our sleep. I bet in pre-industrial societies, we just slept all the time. We totally didn't, or at least it doesn't appear to be the case. Like you look at people now in sort of like groups without electric lighting, they're sleeping like 5 to 7 hours a night, which is pretty much what we do for duration in modern life. But you ask them like, hey, do you have a sleep problem? And a vanishingly small percentage say, oh, I've got a problem with sleep, despite having durations where a lot of us nowadays would be like, oh, I can't function on this. This is impossible. So what's different? What's different is their light environment. And so even if they're awake, they're in the dark, kind of against their will as the sun goes down and it stays dark and it's super dark. And their days are also, in general, a lot brighter than ours are. If you're like in a windowless office, you're not getting light. And you might say like, okay, who cares? Like light is just your environment, but it functions in your body like a drug. And I had a guy once I described this to, and he was like really nodding his head, being like, yeah, like light is a drug. And I was like, he's listening. He's really getting it. This is great. And then he was like, yeah. And I don't think humans need to eat food. I think we can just absorb light. And so like I think sometimes people hear you say stuff like light is a drug, and then they jump like 5 steps ahead to actually you're a Bulbasaur, you don't need to eat. Like it's like no. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that literally there's cells in your eyes that are going to send an electric signal to your brain, which is going to release chemicals in response to light exposure. And when you get bright nights and dark days, which is sort of the standard, where you get irregular days and nights, long days, short days, you have stuff to do, so you keep the lights on, you keep working, it's going to really affect your body's clock because it was not set up to handle that kind of input, that kind of super irregular input. It's real hard science that light has this effect on your body, and I think people are starting to wake up to it now.
Ah, and I think some things that people might have heard about are like melatonin production, which while that's a steroid that you can just buy in the US, I don't know if this is the way everywhere, but it's just like over the counter. You could just pick it up at the grocery store.
It's not true everywhere. It's you just can't do that in like the UK and I think Australia. It's like, no, you gotta get a prescription for this.
You absolutely can in the US. So, but I think people might have like heard about like light exposure to melatonin and feeling sleepy, but it's a lot more than that. It affects like a lot of processes in the body. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I sometimes describe circadian rhythms like an audio clip that's been super, super slowed down. Like if I recorded myself saying this sentence and then I played it for you at 0.1 speed, it would be you wouldn't be able to parse it as words. And so simply by making it faster, our brains are like, yeah, I can understand that, but slower, like we've got other stuff going on. We're not going to notice it. And so I think circadian rhythms being such slow rhythms compared to like breathing or your heartbeat, we just don't track that they are rhythmic. But like your immune response is rhythmic. So people have different responses to vaccines at different times of the day. People have different responses to immunotherapy for cancer at different times of the day. The strength of your hands is different. So you're stronger at some times versus others. You can run faster and leap higher at some times versus others. Your metabolism absolutely changes. One of the biggest things that like I personally had noticed when I was doing my really regular sleep experiment is I stopped eating at night. And it was not like a willpower thing at all. I just didn't feel cravings for food late in the day ever. And so that was like an interesting thing to observe about myself because before, like especially in my chaos days in college, I'd be like 3 a.m., like microwaving a s'more in my dorm room. I became sort of actively put off by the thought of doing that. And it's because your metabolism is a circadian rhythm. But if you have irregular days, if you have irregular sleep and you don't get enough light in the day and you don't get really dark at night, rhythms that sort of go up and down really profoundly start to get muddled, kind of like the difference of a bunch of people jumping in sync on a trampoline versus like everyone doing their own thing on the trampoline where like nobody's actually getting that much like height because they're all canceling each other out. Like you get muddled rhythms versus really clear rhythms, and muddled rhythms make it so, oh, maybe if you're me, hungry around the clock, but clear rhythms make it so you're like, no, I'm in day mode, I'm in night mode. So yeah, basically any body function has this rhythm and it's happening all the time. We're not clocking it because they're sort of so slow that you're not noticing a difference from 1 minute to the next. But an implication of this is that like drugs, treatments, like surgeries, all these things could be time optimized. And what I work on, I sort of left academia to work on this, is trying to bring this to people in the real world, saying, hey, like, how can we make it so that this drug works as effectively as possible for you? How can we make it so that you recover from surgery as quickly as possible simply by factoring in time?
Ah, I'm going to ask because I know that every pole dancer listening, like the ears perked up like a little puppy. So you mentioned that grip strength is greater at certain times of day. Could we get like a clock segment on that?
Yeah. And
Just a way
actually,
to figure it out?
for all physical fitness things, generally it's going to be like when your core body temperature is at its highest point. And if you've ever had like sort of like you feel alert in the morning and you have this like maybe middle of day dip and then you feel alert again later. That's something called the wake maintenance zone. And I think of it as your body being like, all right, get your act together. You need to get your act together before the sun goes down and it's dark. So you have this sort of second surge of energy that lines up pretty well with when you're good at athletic things, like good at strength. And you can see evidence of this in sort of like sports team performance, where sort of their like sort of evening, like maybe 6 p.m. or something for the average person, is when they're winning more than they should, accounting for everything else. But it's highly individual specific. So let's say like your extreme early type, okay, well then it could be happening closer to 1 p.m. If you're an extreme night owl, it could be more like 10 p.m. And none of these things are fixed. So like you're not like doomed to be the exact same form of night owl forever. Like I could change your chronotype by changing your light exposure, simply by like sending you to Europe for a week and then bringing you back, and you're still on Europe time when you first land, and that would move your best at sports time. But the short answer is like circadian science would predict you'd be best at pole for a later in the day class. And I'm curious, does that like at all align with your experience, or have you like noticed it all?
Personally, yes. And that's also actually why I've scheduled my classes when I've scheduled. So I teach the same class Tuesday, Wednesday, the same like format of class. And the Tuesday one is at 1 p.m. my time, and the Wednesday one is at 7:30 p.m. my time. And the Tuesday one I have at much lower intensity. So it's more like a recovery class. And then the Wednesday one, which again, same class, much later, I've bumped the intensity quite a bit. And of course, I got students all over. So European friends, sorry, you're getting low intensity class at your sort of like more active time. But yeah, that's definitely been my experience. Also, I don't know that this is related so much to circadian rhythm as it is to just like moving bodies, but I have noticed that my flexibility, and for most people, flexibility tends to be a little bit better later in the day. And that just could be because you're farther from being still for a long time. And you've just got synovial fluid moving around and lymph, blood, etc. But sort of general observation, yeah.
Yeah, and it also jives with the sort of like your core body temperature being higher around then. So yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, which, I mean, to be fair, we're also manipulating intentionally with a warm up, right? Like that's part of the reason that we warm up, is to raise the core body temperature to increase heart rate, in addition to like joint maintenance. So one thing that you brought up, I'm sure that other people have also seen, like, I'm going to call it sort of pseudoscience around the idea of chronotypes. And like, if you just take the right supplement from me, Beefy McJawman, at noon, you too can get your perfect workout in at 3 a.m. and look like me. So what is actually the current consensus and understanding based on the research around that? And what's just like, I'm trying to think of a word other than malarkey, but we're just going to go with malarkey. We're just gonna go with that.
Malarkey in spirit. Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a story, which is in like the early 2010s, these researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder did something incredibly on brand for Colorado, which is they went camping. They're like, we're doing science. And everyone was like, yeah, you're camping. You just want to go camp. And then they came back with this like incredibly influential result, which is they looked at people's melatonin rhythms, living as they were in just sort of normal life. And this was kind of their stand-in for chronotype, because some people had their melatonin rhythms kicking in really late. Your body naturally produces melatonin. There were some people in that study, they weren't producing melatonin until I think like 2 a.m. That's insanely late. That's crazy late, like really late. And then you had a lot of normies who were doing it around 8 p.m. and like a few people early, but it was sort of a long tail. There were like a lot of late people that extended really late. It wasn't a symmetric bell curve. Took them camping. What was going on when they were camping? They were getting a ton of light during the day and just at night. They didn't have phones on. They just sat by the fire, brought them back into the lab afterward, looked at their melatonin rhythms again, and all the extreme late types were gone. They just vanished. It was a symmetric curve now where like nobody who was an extreme stayed that extreme. Yeah, they were still a little later, but they weren't super, super late. And so I think the way we talk about chronotype in the field and how people should think about it is, okay, like there's probably something inherent to you that's gonna affect how your body processes the signals you give it. So for instance, you might be somebody who's really light sensitive, which is an explanation for those extreme late types who vanished in the study, who started looking like normies at the end of it. If you're really light sensitive and you're in sort of normal indoor light, like your living room at 10 p.m., your brain might be like, light. the sun is still up. I can't go to sleep. I gotta delay my rhythms. I gotta be awake. And therefore you say like, oh, I'm this late chronotype. But the same person who just has like me as their roommate, and I come in and I'm like, turn off these lights. Like they would be having their melatonin rhythm start much earlier. They'd be waking up earlier. So it's this like you're a machine with certain configuration built in, but that's like half maybe of your expressed chronotype, and the other half is your environment, like what you do, like what your environment is like, the light you get in the day, the light you get at night. And something I really passionately believe about circadian rhythms is like any hack that's like, oh, do this one thing is fragile because your body is always paying attention to the environment. Like there's kind of no getting around the having to think about the full 24-hour day for 24-hour rhythms. And I think this is true, including in the middle of the day. Sometimes you see people who are like, in the middle of the day, light doesn't do anything to your body's clock. But I really think the thing it's doing is it's reinforcing that daytime is happening right now, in the same way that if you get light, like if I kick down your door at 3 a.m. and I shine a big light in your face, that's going to massively confuse your circadian clock. It's going to be like, what? I was so convinced this was nighttime, and now there's a flashlight on my head. And so it's not just that light in the very early morning and like the evening matter. It's light around the full 24-hour day. And if you're trying to get away with like a 15-minute thing and then you'll fix everything, it's going to be vulnerable, because what you do the 23.75 hours before and after that 15-minute thing have a way bigger effect than that 15-minute thing. And it doesn't mean you can't like say like, hey, I'm going to get a surge of light when I can, or I'm going to do simple things like make my environment dim. But yeah, you kind of can't escape the circadian clock is always listening to what you're doing and using that to determine your chronotype.
Yeah, it's something we talk about a fair amount. People who've been in class with me will know this, is any slice of time, you still have to consider the rest of your life going on, right? So if you go to pole class and let's say you've got a young child at home and you're not sleeping well and you're eating at irregular hours and you're just very stressed, even if, everything else lines up the way it was, you're not going to have as much in your bucket. All stress contributes to the same bucket, and that includes the fun stress from working out and learning new tricks, and that includes traffic, right? And I think it's very similar, right? You have this very complex system. We all have finite resources and amounts of control as humans. And if we want to make changes, we kind of got to think about everything. We kind of got to touch all the dials, because biology is squishy and complex, especially when it comes to like behavior. There's so many variables, blah, blah, blah. So it'd be great if things were very separable and discrete, and there were no interactions and no latent variables. But unfortunately, that's not how organic organism works.
100%.
Yeah. Also, what I'm hearing is that people who are firmly opposed to the big lights, like the overhead light during the evening, are factually correct.
Yeah, and actually they're more beautiful and charming than people who are like, no, let's keep these on. And they've got, like just better personalities in every way.
That's winning smiles.
Yeah, that's what science says.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, also, just a sidebar for folks who are not super familiar with U.S. geography. Colorado's in the west. It's not super densely populated. It gets real dark there at night, particularly sort of like out in the, I don't know, not city lands. Because I think calling the U.S. land wilderness is like a little bit loaded. So all this, big system, kind of got to think about everything. We do want good sleep, right? Like we feel better. Also, again, just thinking about better pole, right? We want to recover. Listen, everyone's always telling you got to rest, you got to recover, you got to get good sleep, you got to fuel your body, you and all that. But also it helps with motor learning. And a lot of what we do in pole is learning how to do weird shit with our bodies. And we were talking about this in review class on Monday. One of the reasons that I come back and I review things is because just having slept in between skill learning sessions, even if you do nothing else, even if you don't think about it, even if you don't condition it, gives your brain time to process and update and make changes. And if you don't do that, or if that process is interrupted, or if the quality of your sleep is not as good, your motor learning processes are also not as good. And to I mean, obviously I'm reading more deeply in the motor learning literature these days than other types of learning, but my understanding is that that's just true kind of across the board.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And like it's true of both just like nightly sleep, but also you give people very short naps and they do better. Like 10-minute naps even are enough to see sort of better learning and better performance. And so what I often say, like for like I think the number one thing people aren't internalizing right now about their sleep is have this really macroscopic multi-day view of like get into a rhythm with your sleep, do it as regularly as possible. And if you can't sleep, get this really consistent light dark schedule. But then also like if the nap is not going to break your groove, like it's just like a middle of the day nap, not like one at 7 p.m. and you're going to wake up in 2 hours and not be able to sleep, then like absolutely go for it, right? Like because there's all these benefits for learning and how you feel and performance, like let yourself sleep. It's worth it.
Yes, yes, and I'm sure as someone with a little one, you can particularly appreciate the benefits at the moment. Ah. So hopefully we've convinced you. Gotta sleep regularly. So thinking about limiting light exposure, how much does spectrum matter? How much does cool light versus warm light matter? And does wind matter for those? Is that actually important? Question mark?
When definitely matters because the light you get at different times is going to do different things to your body. And I use the analogy of being on a swing to describe this sometimes because if you imagine your rhythms as like you literally being on a swing at a playground, going back and forward, and you think of light as somebody pushing you outward, right? Like if they push you outward right when you're at the very back, furthest back part of the swing, generally speaking, that's good, right? It's like they're about to push me forward. I'm going to get this nice big swing. But if you get the same exact input, which is a push outward, while you're swinging backwards, it's not good. Like you're swinging backwards and somebody's pushing you the opposite direction. It throws off your groove rather than enhancing it. Like it's not fun. Like literally on the playground, it would probably hurt to have somebody do that. But for your rhythms, it's sort of jolting them. They're like, I wasn't expecting this light here. And so that's sort of analogous to light sort of during the day, reinforcing your rhythms, light at night, throwing your rhythms off, being like, I don't know. They are like now disrupted because this same exact signal came in. Spectrum, aka color, is like annoyingly complicated in the following sense, which is that a spectrum of light is hugely like high dimensional, right? Like there's basically like when we talk about spectrum, we're like, okay, we're just gonna characterize light by how much of every wavelength there is. And we're going to sort of go wavelength by wavelength. And we're going to be like, how much 451 nanometer expression is there? And then we're like, oh, there's a lot of it. And we're like, how much 452 expression? And there's like, probably still a good amount of it. And so you get this really high dimensional thing of like, there's a lot of nanometers of light. And you're sort of saying, okay, how much of there, like each of these types is there? But we only have like 4 things in our eyeball that can respond to this hugely high dimensional thing. So you've got this vastly complicated thing that has to pass through the bottleneck of our eyeballs, which are kind of like, I don't know. And so you can get things that look really blue to your sort of your rods and cones, which are these cells in your eyes. And if you look at the spectrum, there's a lot of representation in sort of classical blue part of the spectrum where we're like, yeah, like 400 or 500, like you're like, okay, that checks out. You can also get things that look blue to your rods and cones, but they don't actually have that much representation sort of right in the places where you'd expect, like the sort of bluest part. And it's because basically like whenever you've got this like lots of information getting wheedled down to like little bits of information, you can bamboozle the system. And so if you like look online, you might see things being like blue light, extra bad. And then you might other things being like blue light, debunked. It's not actually bad. And like often what those are doing is they're saying, hey, like we're gonna make 2 spectra and they're gonna look like different colors to your visual like system, like the sort of conscious visual system where you're like, I'm seeing this color, but they're gonna look like the same amount of brightness to your circadian clock. Everyone who's listening to this is like, what is going on? You're basically getting like 3 years of graduate school in like one long paragraph. The point is, like, there's a chunk of the spectrum around 480 nanometers that usually looks blue to people, but not always, that your circadian clock will super respond to. It's like, okay, I see it. That is the signal to receive wakefulness inputs, or like the sun is up, light is happening. And you don't tend to see that for other parts of the spectrum, like maybe like longer wavelengths, for instance. So that it's pretty incontrovertible that the chunk that normally looks blue has the biggest effect on your circadian clock. Biology is squishy and annoying, and so there's like all these things connected, and even if you cut out that chunk of the spectrum, you could still have signals going to your circadian clock through rods and cones talking to it, kind of like sort of through the cells that normally handle the communication, because they're all touching each other. What does this mean in actual practical life? Like, I would say, like, think about, does your environment feel bright to you in the evening, and make it darker. Don't care so much about the color, because your eyes are unreliable narrators when it comes to exactly what you're seeing. Generally think of like warmth as better than cool light, because cool light is probably going to have more of the blues you want to try and avoid, the 480 nanometer. And then in terms of literally, like, okay, is my house dark enough right now? Don't stress so much about side lamps, even your phone if it's on like a low brightness setting. Worry more about overhead lighting that feels white, because like that is what's actually going to, for a lot of people, be conveying day signals. And it doesn't matter if it like looks blue or looks green, like, just, does it feel bright, and is it above you, and is it lighting the space? That's what you want to try and avoid as the day goes on.
Yeah. No big lights during the day.
Yeah, no big lights.
Indeed. Summarize, overall, light exposure, very important. Sleep hygiene, very important. Trying to keep a regular schedule as much as possible. Reducing light exposure, especially in the evening. And would you cue these things to, let's say, sunset in your local environment? Or is it more just sort of like before you want to go to bed?
I would say before you want to go to bed. Like if people are really happy on like a later schedule, I think that's generally fine. If it's super late, like it's after 1 a.m., okay, you might want to move it a little earlier. People after 1 a.m. tend to do worse if that's their bedtime, but that's probably because they're just not getting enough light during the day, because they're sleeping through the time when super bright light is available for free and you want it. So they're sort of limiting the maximum amount of day-night difference they can have. Yeah, and I would just say, like, start to think of your sleep as a rhythm the same way you think about your breathing as a rhythm and your heartbeat as a rhythm. And walking, like, right? Like, walking is a rhythm. And I'm sure also there's like moves and pull that like you're in a rhythm and you're just doing it. And like a groove is a rhythm that's effortless. It's got momentum. You don't have to think about it. And when you look at these like sort of people in pre-industrial societies who are like, yeah, we don't have a sleep problem, even though they're sleeping 5 to 7 hours a night. Like, I think what they have is like a light, dark groove. They don't have any other choice. They're just getting it from the sun, and it's setting them up for success. So really try to make it so your light, dark pattern is sort of as consistent and like free from like you needing to think about it the same way like your steps are when you're walking, where you're just like, yeah, I have this natural gait. I'm doing it because you know what it feels like to be in a groove when you're walking versus like left foot, right foot, left foot. You're like stepping over like shattered glass on the ground. And then I think the last thing I'll sort of say there is like so much focus has been on sleep duration, right? So much focus has been on you need to get X number of hours per night. And it's funny, like you can absolutely see performance differences when people sleep less. You can also see those differences kind of go away when you lie to them about how much sleep they got. And you're like, yeah, you slept great or you didn't sleep great. Like there's like a lot of psychology going on with sleep duration. I think sleep regularity, if your duration is at some, upsettingly low value is more important. And I think that's kind of the story coming out of the sleep field today. So I usually don't think, hey, did I sleep well last night in terms of duration at all. I'm like, hey, did I have a good dark? Like, did I have a good dark the whole time versus a good night's sleep? And if I did, I feel pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, kind of comforting because that's something you can have generally a lot more control over than, like, let's say, stress that might be impacting your ability to sleep well.
100%. Like nothing makes it harder to go to sleep than like the panicked certainty that you're killing yourself by not sleeping.
Mhm.
Whereas you just turn off a light, you put on an audiobook, you stay in the dark, you pretend light at night isn't an option for you, like you're camping, the light switches aren't there, and you give yourself credit for doing something good for your body. Like staying in the dark at night is good for your body. Don't make it so dark that you like trip and fall. If somebody like is like, I need to stay in the dark and they break their leg, I'll feel really bad. But like the act of reinforcing nighttime for your body is like getting it into the groove. It's like it's helping you tomorrow because all minutes of the day add up, right? And like those minutes at night when you're awake, but you're in the dark, that's adding up as a positive relative to being up and reading a book in the light and like just sort of doing daytime things during the nighttime.
Yeah. So some nice actionable steps that everyone can take. Speaking of actionable steps, if folks wanted to say learn more about sleep grooves, where could they do that?
My book, Sleep
Oh,
Group, available where books are sold online. It's a lot of what I said here. It really tries to make people think about sleep like they think about seeing a ball bounce or a kid on a trampoline or a swing, just like an intuition for it versus this like mysterious, unknown, unfathomable abyss. And it also has some charming illustrations. And there's a great audiobook. This really wonderful woman recorded an audiobook for me. So check out Sleep Group, where you find books.
wow. And I'll have a link in the down there. And, you know, also a good place to look for more citations and information if you're like, I want to dig into this. Really want to get knowledgeable about sleep.
Well, hey, Rosie, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Of course, always a joy to catch up. And I think super relevant for us as pole dancers, right? And, you know, just people with bodies who want to feel good in them and not bad in them. And I think that establishing like good sleep hygiene and light hygiene and getting a good dark, as you say, is a great step that we can take. Pretty straightforward to help with that.